Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I'm here with Carl Forehand, and we are continuing our series of podcasts called Good Questions. And so today's topic is, am I getting better? And so I'm going to let Carl kind of kick off where we want to go in this discussion.
And we're currently under Snowmageddon number 2 for this year. Buried in snow. You're off from school today, so we decided to do something productive, record a podcast. The title is Am I Getting Better? So, we're involved in ministry for 25 years or so, about 20 as pastor and wife, and a few years before and a little bit in between, a little bit after. And so we saw what churches are like. We saw what they do well, what they don't do well. And you kind of come to the point where you're asking, am I getting better? Is this helping me? And I think there were times when I wanted to get mental health treatment. It was expensive. I didn't know where to go. And besides that, I was working a job and pastoring a church and couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
So, or didn't think I could afford it.
Maybe you didn't think you could afford it.
And besides that, it wasn't really encouraged by the denomination that we were in. That wasn't a strong issue. Trauma informed was not, that language wasn't available for most of our time that we were in ministry. So as these things were starting to develop, though, there was a tendency to ignore it. Right?
Yeah.
So I didn't ever feel like in church that I was getting better. I learned new skills like preaching. I learned how to deal with people and things like that better. But my overall mental health, well-being, improving myself didn't seem to be happening. Was that your experience too?
Yeah, and I think it's because you're taught to bypass everything, and you're taught to, if you, there's a lot of shame that works around that as well. So like if you do bring up that you feel like you need help or you're struggling with something, there's a lot of shame because obviously you're not trusting God enough to help you through it, or you're not praying enough or whatever. So, there's a lot of factors that go into that, not being encouraged by the denomination, or the denomination telling you we have all the answers, but yet not really giving you concrete answers. Yeah, so I do think that was both of our experience. You just didn't bring it up because there was, too much guilt and shame attached to bringing something like that up.
Like you said, it makes people nervous, right? So they don't know what to say, so they'll say anything. Even when I went through spiritual leadership coaching training and did all this about how to listen better and so on, which is good. But then when you would get to the answers, what are the answers for that? I'm feeling this, I'm going through this is tough. And the answer would always be pray more, read your Bible more, come to more, attend activities, give your volunteer labor. That was the advice most of the time.
Right.
Because it made people uncomfortable, they really didn't have answers. And one of the things I talked about in the blog was just that the church was too busy. There was never a time when the service could be interrupted.
That's true.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, You remember the couple of times I moved the chairs around and did some things like that, and it
Mm-hmm.
just really freaked people out.
Or change the whole order of the worship service,
Hmm.
because you felt it's just interesting because people in churches always like, need to just be led by the Spirit. And then times where you really did feel led to, start with just some community prayer or something like that, that just threw people off.
Yeah.
They wanted everything to stay the same. And which in a way, I get. I'm a creature of habit myself, but, again, are we listening to the Spirit or not, So anyway.
Pastors of a church of any size will say that they spend a lot of their time in sermon preparation. And if they do two or three a week, that's a lot of prep time. I don't think they spend as much time as they say they do in
Mm-hmm.
general, but they spend a lot of time doing that. There's the choir is getting ready for the show,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The band or
The
whatever you
band,
have,
yeah.
the praise band, the choir, the whoever leads it is spending all that time getting ready. The church has to be cleaned. It has to be kept
Mm-hmm.
clean. Parking has to be managed. They say the holy trinity of parties, preschoolers,
And
park,
potties.
potties, preschools, and parking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you got to take care of all those things. And then they're just really too busy to spend individual time.
Mm-hmm.
We,
Well, and because it's an organization.
yeah,
And if you think about any organization, any company, I mean, they they don't have, I mean, even at my school, yeah, I can go talk to my principal about something, but I've got to do it at a time where it's convenient for him and convenient for me and not going to disrupt, instruction and, all that stuff. So, like, I just keep saying on these podcasts, look at churches for what they really are. They're organizations, and organizations don't really have time to manage the emotional and psychological aspects of their employees, or congregants or whatever you want to call them.
at the same time, they're also taking your time and your money and your volunteer labor
Mm-hmm.
so that you don't have spare time
Mm-hmm.
to do
Mm-hmm.
anything like that, to just do that work. So they're busy.
Well, I think that's part of it. I think, I fall into this trap and I don't even go to church anymore, but if I keep myself busy, then I don't have to maybe deal with some hard stuff,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So it's a way of escaping, it's a way of numbing. And I think, religious organizations are really good at that. Get your people busy, so they don't have time to, think about questions or think about doubts that they might have or think about real mental issues, and psychological issues that they might have.
Yeah, and in a way, we can understand that a little bit because, even in a family, when you're in a hurry,
Hmm.
you have too many things to do. You don't have time for someone to stop and ask too many questions or whatever. And so corporations run like that, organizations run like that,
Hmm.
churches run like that, and try to deny that, I think, is missing the point, or you're just not seeing things as they
Hmm.
are.
Hmm.
Because even if the church is more inclusive, even if I guarantee it doesn't have much real time for your grief,
Hmm.
for you to just to sit with you, not give you advice, and listen to what you say.
Well, and honestly, most pastors don't even have that type of training
Yeah.
where they are qualified to, you know, sit down. You think about all the things that a pastor needs to do to keep the organization running. That means they are going to have very little time to sit down with people, and counsel them. You know, there's just not a lot of time for that.
One thing the boards that I was involved with, they were always encouraging me to spend time in sermon preparation. They wanted me to be doing that,
Hmm.
no matter what else is going on. But what if our um, whole congregation needed mental health issues?
Hmm.
Um, we talked about they didn't have time for it, but like you said, they also don't even understand the problem.
Right.
They don't. Um, that's not where their training is. It's
Hmm.
not what they tend to read books about. They don't
Hmm.
listen to survivor stories.
Right.
You know,
Again, they don't have time, but there is also a fear factor involved there. What can of worms will be opened if we really start listening to survivor stories?
yeah. I think the thing they don't realize, number one, is that by ignoring it, they're further
Uh-huh.
traumatizing people.
Hmm.
But also, they don't understand that their belief systems sometimes are traumatizing people,
Hmm.
and the way they conduct things, and just use that line of "we don't have time."
Hmm.
They just don't understand how that is traumatizing people, and they characterize people that would admit that as weak or
Hmm.
crybabies or troublemakers, or they're just and they're sometimes just encouraged to get on the bus or go somewhere else,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
And I think that's what usually ends up happening when we get frustrated is we tend to just leave and not say anything.
Hmm.
I I thought about at the end of our three churches when we were spending time in the bigger church, I thought, somehow I could fix it and coax, and I ended up being injured, by the same system and in
Hmm.
the same way as before,
Hmm.
um, because of trying to get back in there and do things, and because they just don't understand how to affect trauma and how to deal with it. I think some of it is also miracle thinking, and they think, well, since we don't understand it, and since I don't have time, then maybe God will just turn it over to God.
Yeah.
And so when we turn it over to God, then we're also ignoring the problem in
Hmm.
another way.
Hmm.
And usually God doesn't just heal psychological problems like that.
Right.
That doesn't just remove trauma
Hmm.
just because you prayed something. Now,
Hmm.
I agree that praying with someone else may regulate you.
Hmm.
It may calm you. And, you're not causing any new trauma at that time, but it doesn't necessarily heal your trauma.
Hmm.
Um,
Hopefully it's not causing any new trauma.
yeah,
I
right.
mean,
That's right.
just
Right.
depends on what, prayers are lifted up and what the vocabulary is in those
Yeah,
prayers. I mean,
definitely.
I definitely.
Prayers could definitely cause trauma. I
Hmm.
mean, people have, I mean, people pray at other people all the
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
and it's meant to be controlling,
Hmm.
and it's meant to be embarrassing,
Hmm.
and none of that is helpful. None of that
Right.
does good. But I'm just saying that there can be some regulation.
Hmm.
When someone puts their
Hmm.
arm around you
Yeah.
and listens to you to some degree
Hmm.
till they get nervous.
Right.
And everybody thinks their church is not like that.
Hmm.
And I would say that we really didn't see it clearly till we stepped back
Hmm.
and got some distance from it, and then we were allowed. But another problem is people aren't allowed to complain. We kind of covered that
Hmm.
a little bit.
Well, and I think complain,
Yeah,
I don't know
wrong
how
worded, right?
well, I don't know. I mean, maybe you just have some real concerns. Maybe it's not
Right.
complaining. Maybe there are some real concerns. I don't think that, me questioning the contradictions of the Bible is a complaint. It's a concern of mine. And, but I can see how, like, those in charge of a religious institution would label that as a complaint
Hmm.
because it, it's going to upset the apple cart. We can't let people start to question things or maybe doubt some things because that could just upset the whole organization. So I mean, I don't think that the word complain is necessarily a, a bad word choice. But I think we have to, I think it depends who it is that would use the word complain
Hmm.
versus concerns.
Yeah, and for me, it was me perceiving that as negativity
Mm-hmm.
or criticism
Right.
instead of someone trying to be helpful,
Mm-hmm.
which many times they probably were trying to be helpful. Um, but I was worried about the organization's
Mm-hmm.
success and all of this stuff. I felt like just slowed me down, and took extra time that I didn't have. And so I think we always cared for our people. We cared about them.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Almost
but
to a fault,
right,
really.
and our concentration was on the vision, where we were going, um, trying to keep this thing from going off track and missing the mark. And we wanted to accomplish something and make it successful.
So let me ask you, what was your vision? Like, and like for me, whenever we went into a new church, like I really genuinely wanted people to like experience Jesus, like
Hmm.
the love and acceptance and forgiveness and all those what I would consider like positive qualities about Jesus. I wasn't thinking of, we got to bring in more people. And I don't say if that was your vision, I mean, I think that makes sense for a pastor. I'm just curious. Like I just wanted like I saw hurting people come in and I didn't want them to hurt anymore.
Yeah.
But
I,
like what was your vision? Do you feel like your vision was based on, the church planters that brought you in, like you had to adopt their vision?
mhm.
Because I also do feel like you had that compassionate side toward people and you did want to see them, healed and experience love and forgiveness and all those things.
I think for me, it was that all three of the churches that we took on were basically on life support
Mm-hmm.
when we got to them.
Yeah.
So the first one was meeting in a double wide trailer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when it had about 20 people, and we doubled to 40, 50 people, then we didn't have any room. And so the vision was I got to get a building to put it
Mm-hmm.
in. That was the focus for a while. And then, well, what programs can we do to educate people? If they knew more about the Bible, they'd find all the solutions in there. And
Mm-hmm.
so we were, I think I was always focused on love and grace and compassion.
Mm-hmm.
But the way the system works and the way it operates didn't really allow me to do that. Number one, I didn't know how, like we mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't seem to have time, and we just couldn't get that vision. Plus, people had been conditioned not to accept mental health. They were
True.
praying for miracles,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted their church to be alive, to be successful, to have energy
Mm-hmm.
flowing through it. And I think we accomplished a lot of those goals, but I think the thing I regret is that we didn't get to do what we know now how to do,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that we know how to kind of lead people to better mental health and healing their trauma and addressing those kind of things. But another thing we'd have to do is remove the toxic doctrines
Mm-hmm.
from a church, and usually that kind of tanks
Yeah, and I
whatever
do
you're doing.
I do feel like, especially at our last church, like you did try to do some of that.
Hmm.
And,
For
it
example,
it like totally like bit you in the butt.
yeah, and for example, yeah, on that last church, there was, a thing about just kind of sexual misconduct and those,
Mm-hmm.
and there we had a course to go through for that, and some of the people that should have been engaged in helping with that really drew back from that and didn't want any part of it, because it wasn't framed just right. Like they weren't sure if the who wrote the book,
Mm-hmm.
um, what might have been a different denomination or something, and they were so leery of that and so afraid to talk about what's going on
Mm-hmm.
in their life that it didn't really do much. And the last Bible study that we tried to lead, Experiencing God, was
Mm-hmm.
written by a Southern Baptist, Henry Blackaby.
Mm-hmm.
And, the one guy still couldn't accept that. He wasn't
Mm-hmm.
sure about this, that it was, but some of those kind of things, when I did Experiencing God at Big Lake and asked the lady who had been teaching Sunday school for 50 years, who I'm talking about,
Yeah.
uh, a personal question like, how does this affect you personally? What do you
Mm-hmm.
challenges you go through? And she was like, me? Wait, what about no, I don't. And
Yeah.
she couldn't formulate an answer as to her experience with this
Mm-hmm.
concept from a Baptist, uh, you know,
Yeah.
from a Baptist Bible study leader to in a Baptist church,
Mm-hmm.
and not just any Baptist, a Southern Baptist like she was and had been all her life, but couldn't, was just conditioned against talking about her feelings,
Mm-hmm.
talking about anything that's going on inside, and we just talk about the mechanics of the Bible, and argue around
Mm-hmm.
about that maybe a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
it just didn't seem natural for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
There, we believe now there are effective ways to improve and lead a productive, healthy, and vibrant life. They can be achieved with or without religion. However, if we experience trauma within that system, taking a break may be necessary for healing. I believe that somatic therapies, which link the mind and the body, are among the most effective practices as they help us integrate our trauma rather than to overlook it. And we've engaged with different therapies. We're going to a conference this weekend,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Attachment and Trauma Network.
Mm-hmm.
It's specifically designed for schools, and so I'm kind of supporting you in that.
But it's like I say,
And we're going to have a
talking
good time,
about
damn it.
trauma, you talk about trauma and like, yeah, maybe focused on, you know, children. And by children, I mean like anywhere to 18. But really, trauma, trauma is trauma.
Mhm.
And some of some of what our kids are experiencing is actually generational trauma. And so, even though it might be like called trauma sensitive schools conference, I think that, you can take a lot of what these speakers are going to talk about and you can apply that to, any type of organization, not just a school,
Mhm.
because trauma exists everywhere. And when we bury our head in the sand and act like it doesn't, that just re-traumatizes people, but it also doesn't, it really can't, and I wonder too, like if religious organizations could get on board with being trauma informed and trauma responsive, you know, I if they could, they might actually see an uptick in, membership and things like that,
Mhm.
because I think that their congregants would truly feel cared for.
Right.
But they're so afraid of it because if we bring it up, and especially because you would have to acknowledge that some of that trauma comes from your doctrine, comes from, inappropriate, uh,
Policies.
inappropriate relations with,
Mhm. Mhm.
between people that are maybe pastors or priests with congregants or small children. You have to admit to that stuff, and I think that is just so scary. But I don't ever see like religious organizations just making this enormous comeback or whatever,
Mhm.
because we've really seen a decline since COVID.
Mhm.
But I don't see them making this miraculous comeback
Mhm.
if we're not willing to deal with a lot of the issues that have been, swept under the rug.
Yeah, for sure. Improvement Here's what I wrote. Improvement requires hard work, patience, integrity, persistence, and a strong desire to seek solutions. Fortunately, established and effective therapies are available. We cannot escape the challenges of human nature and the necessity of growing from the circumstances that were handed to us. But each day we learn more about effective and ineffective approaches, and we refuse to rely on unrealistic solutions from systems that have historically failed to address those issues. So uh, it's, I think it's just going to take enough people. There's a lot of people out here in the desert we see that are they're just committed to their own well-being, and it takes a lot. It takes a lot of their energy and a lot of their time, but they are getting better. And I think it's going to take enough of those people to speak up and go, I'm just as good. I'm essentially better without the religious system. And I would say most of them say better, not just as good. But even if I'm just as good, then I'm not paying all that money and doing all that volunteer labor, and still being the same or worse, never better.
The thing is, for any relationship to get better, it takes both sides, right? So my thing is, you and I stepped back and we did the work that we needed to do and are continuing to do the work that we need to do, but we haven't seen that from the religious organization
Right.
side.
Right.
And so I can't, in good faith or good conscience, put myself back into a situation or an organization that is unwilling to do the work.
I totally don't buy what Paul or whoever wrote it said. But he said, if anyone's in Christ, they're a new creation. So if you say the prayer or whatever, do the thing, get baptized, whatever your religion requires, um, so the question we're asking is, are you better? So after you prayed the prayer, and people always say, well, I got off of drugs and I don't drink anymore, but I have now religion's my drink of choice or whatever. But seriously, are you better? Are you a new creation? Are you totally different now? And I would say that from 20 years of ministry, I saw that most people didn't improve that much. Community might have given them some support. They might have been in an AA program where they stopped drinking or whatever they needed to do. Sometimes they trade one habit for another habit. Religion can easily become a habit. And everyone just has to ask that question. If I'm in a religious system, is that religious system really making me better?
Right.
Or, do I still have anxiousness? Do I still have these things that keep triggering me? I keep doing the same things over and over. Am I 100% better? That's a really powerful statement. If you're in Christ, you're a new creation. You're totally new, brand new. It's like Jesus said, you're being reborn or something. And if that's even what he meant, but you're a new creation. You're fixed, right?
Right.
And then we say, well, if you're having problems, then we'll wait for God to fix you, really, for sure. Again, we'll just trust God that He's going to work this out. He's going to fix all the pieces and fix you again, even though you're a new creation, if you really are saved.
Yeah.
And it's all that rhetoric, but it just keeps people waiting, and they're waiting kind of in a sense of shame.
Right. I was
Right?
going to say.
Within the church, they're waiting, going, there's supposed to be something wrong with me. He says I have a plan and a purpose, but I can't find my plan or purpose. And 99.5%, I guess, of the people in our churches, even though we had successful churches for the time we were there, most of them didn't know their plan and purpose unless they just punted and said, well, I'll just go with the church's plan and purpose because surely that's right, or follow the pastor's plan for me, but they're just they're still in that cycle of shame. I must not be good enough because it's not fixed for me. It didn't automatically get better when I was saved. I have mental health issues and I don't know how to deal with them. And so that must be my fault. And so I'll keep listening up. Maybe I'll go to a conference, even pay a bunch of money to see if I can fix this, get the right information, then I'll be better. But it's just, they're just stuck in that same shame spiral that creates those kind of problems over and over again.
Yep. Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
That was a little bit of a rant, right?
It's all right.
I would encourage you out there, if you're listening and you're kind of tossing this around going, my church is better than most churches, and that may be true. I'd invite you to be honest about that, but just ask yourself, in the past 10 years, have you gotten better? What areas specifically have gotten better? But what is still stuck? What's not working? And what might I need to take to a trauma-informed counselor and help them do some therapies with me that could really solve this problem for good and integrate that trauma instead of ignoring it?
Right.
So I'd encourage you to ask that question and hang on to it for a while until you get an answer.
Yeah.
We thank you for tuning in and hope that you'll continue to listen and share the podcast with other people. As always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.